We have an exciting program for you tonight. Our first presenter is a historian, Bob Harris. Dr. Bob Harris. Hello, hello, good evening, everyone. Happy anniversary. My name is Bob Harris. I have white hair, a white beard, glasses, and an all black outfit. Now, I want to talk about the deaf community and Governor Rudy Perpich. The story starts when I told my great uncle, Judge David Bazelon of the United States Court of Appeals, that I will be coming to a job interview with Dr. John Scanlon at St. Paul Ramsey Hospital in 1975. He was excited and told his law clerk. His clerk, I just found out, was a brother of Governor Rudy Perpich. Cool. Could it mean that I might meet him? The brother told the governor that I would be coming to St. Paul for a job interview, and the governor wrote a very nice letter welcoming me and said, "Please come, that Minnesota is a great place to live. Anything you need, I'm happy to help." Set up a warm connection between him and me. When I moved here, I met him 3 times. I wrote a total of 16 letters to him. I received 12 responses from him and his aides. Trust was established and opened new doors for deaf leaders from then on. At the same time, something was going on in the deaf community. Deaf people were having social chats, and those led to a questioning of whether there was a need to set up a deaf leadership training. 47 people were invited to Harry and Ruth Goddard's house to discuss whether they should go ahead and set up this training or not, and many nodded yes. They suggested having 2 kickoff conferences to gauge deaf people's interest in leadership training, and responses were overwhelmingly positive. The Deaf Leadership Training Committee was established. 27 deaf people were involved on this committee. They met 12 times, and eventually they established Minnesota's first deaf leadership training program in Brainerd, Minnesota on September 24th to 26th, 1976. 2 months later, the Deaf Club at Thompson Hall hosted the White House Conference on Deaf Individuals. 97 deaf people attended, brainstorming sessions were conducted. They gathered 53 concerns and recommendations. A report was compiled and copies were sent to the governor, Minnesota State Council for the Handicapped, parent groups, and so on. And then, 2 weeks later, the governor hosted a conference on handicapped individuals where over 100 deaf people attended. As a whole, the governor showed a little understanding of what deaf people needed. He called for an informal meeting with a few deaf people and asked them what they wanted to see. I said the deaf community wanted a state commission, and he asked why. I knew that Connecticut had a large commission already, Texas had a commission, and I gave the governor this example. State services for the deaf at that time had a budget of $33,000. State services for the blind had a $3 million budget. That was a huge gap. The governor was very surprised and embarrassed by that. At that time, talking about the governor, he was the lieutenant governor. His boss, Governor Wendell Anderson, resigned as governor to take Senator Walter Mondale's position because Mondale had become the new vice president under President Jimmy Carter. So as a result, Rudy Perpich took over Wendell Anderson's seat as governor. In 1977, when, during his inauguration, he arranged to have an interpreter to sign for him. That was impressive that he told the interpreter to stand close to him, not telling her to stand far away from him. The deaf community was thrilled to watch the interpreter signing the governor's speech. That was an important moment. And my boss, Dr. Scanlon, and I were working hard to improve services for deaf people. He attended meetings with the department heads of the DVR and the Department of Public Welfare. He pleaded that they hire more deaf professionals to work with deaf people, but the department heads were not interested. They preferred to ask the governor for funding for other projects. Dr. Scanlon was not happy about this, wrote a very good, in-depth letter to tell the governor what the department heads had told him. The governor was not happy to hear about this. He mulled it over and came up with an idea. He asked the state planning agency for $100,000 for a 2-year study on deaf people's needs. And directed SPA to find an administrator to conduct the study. And we asked the governor to please hire a deaf administrator. He said that would be fine and told the SPA to do so. Staff at the SPA were nervous and wondered where they would find a deaf person to run the study. They asked the Minnesota Foundation for Better Hearing and Speech to meet with deaf individuals to figure this out, and deaf people gave the SPA a lot of input. Finally, they found a person with hearing loss. His name was Dwight Maxa. Dwight Maxa. You saw his face tonight on the screen. Now, he needed people to work on the committee and brought a total of 40 people on. Later, he realized that was too many people. He preferred to reduce the number of people in the committee to 9. The committee needed to elect a chair, and I nominated a deaf person, Jerry Nelson. Another nomination came for a hearing person named Bob Lauritsen. He'd worked for the program for deaf students at TVI back then. A vote was called, and it was a tie. Another vote, and again it was a tie. A third call for a vote ended in another tie, and I raised my hand, though I had to fight through nerves, and said, "It is time now for a deaf person to chair this committee." Finally, the vote passed. Later, I learned that Bob Lauritsen had voted for Jerry. That had helped break the tie. Congratulations to Jerry. Where is he? Oh, there he is. Hey, Jerry. And for your information, Governor Perpich was the one who signed into law our Minnesota Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. He signed it in 1985. At that time, it was named the Minnesota Council for Hearing Impaired. The name has changed 2 times and is now the Minnesota Commission for Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing, a long name that we now abbreviate. I was also surprised to find out while reviewing some old files that in 1985, in a government budget memo, it was proposed that the 2 state schools for the deaf and blind in Faribault be closed. Reasons for this proposal were declining enrollment and increasing costs spent per student. People in Faribault rejected this idea, and they flocked angrily to the state capitol to bark and shout, "No!" The governor heard them loudly and clearly. He said, "Okay," and withdrew the proposal from the budget. And I applaud the deaf community for that. Now, was this the end of his work with the deaf community? No, there was more. He knew that the deaf community needed telecommunication access. He asked the state planning agency for $50,000 to be awarded to MFBHS to study deaf people's telecommunication needs. At that time, Jerry Nelson conducted the study. It was passed and signed into law. It had a long name, Telecommunication Access for Communication Impaired Persons, abbreviated as TACIP, TACIP. Doug Ball at this time was working on a project about Olaf Hansen, who built Thompson Hall and built a few houses in Faribault. Doug invited the governor to come to Faribault to sign into law the new name of State Highway 299 as Olaf Hansen Drive. How cool is that? Fast forward to 2025, 40 years since 1985. And we're here celebrating 40 years. Two more events took place this year. On April 22nd, 2025, a new book was published about Governor Perpich titled Perpich, a Minnesota original. I read the book. It was good. I give it a thumbs up. 2 weeks after the book was published, the governor's wife, who lived until 94, passed away. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. I wonder if it was God's plan for First Lady Lola Perpich to bring the book to show Rudy in heaven. Maybe. In conclusion, from 1975, when we had few services in Minnesota, such as DVR, the Faribault Deaf School, Deaf Club, and TVI, to now with so many resources all over the state of Minnesota. We have come a long way, but there's still more work to come. I hope you will all work hard for another 40 years to promote and to preserve the rights of deaf people as first-class citizens. Thank you.